Trevor Lawrence is elite. Zeke Elliott scores 7 games in a row. That and much, much more on the RotoWire Monday morning top takeaways fantasy football podcast for week 15. Welcome in to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Alan Seslowsky, sitting in for Jeff Erickson. And of course, fear not, as always, I'm with Nick Whalen, and we are going to break down somewhat all of the games, as many as we can get to, and as many takeaways as we can get to for the Week 15, the first round of the Fantasy Football Playoffs, and give you a few actionable takeaways that you can use going into Week 16. As always, the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast is brought to you by No House Advantage. Use promo code WIRE and get over there to check out their game. Nick, have you ever played No House Advantage? I started playing in the middle of the season. It's a really, really interesting game. They have a nice interface as well.
Yeah, they do. They do. And, you know, I played it a few times, and we talked about it on the XM show as well. Obviously, being up here in Wisconsin, I have some limitations as far as what we can do in the official gambling sphere. So, sites like No House Advantage are kind of the perfect supplement.
All right. Well, let's go back to Thursday night, which seems like it wasn't even part of Week 15. I mean, that's the trouble when you have games on Thursday and Saturday and Sunday, and then, obviously heading into Monday. But briefly, I want to talk about that San Francisco-Seattle game. And Christian McCaffrey, he's been an Iron Man. And now we just got news in that the Jonathan Taylor, he's been like a disaster. Isn't it funny that Taylor was considered the rock and McCaffrey was considered the injury risk? It's flipped completely on its head a few months ago.
Yeah, I don't know if I would quite describe it as funny, Alan, as somebody who had Jonathan Taylor in a pretty important fantasy football playoff matchup this past week. So I basically knew that I was done by like 12:30 Central Time on Saturday once Taylor exited that game, and it was pretty clear that he wasn't coming back. And we should mention, by the way, high ankle sprain for Jonathan Taylor. Expectation is that we probably don't see him again the remainder of the season. So if you somehow survived your matchup while starting Jonathan Taylor last week, congratulations. But probably not going to be all roses the rest of the way. But yeah, going back to Thursday night, I mean, I think in a lot of ways this game played out pretty similarly to what we expected, right? It was a dominant performance by the 49ers defense. Once again, the 49ers allowed Brock Purdy, I think, to just kind of stick with what he's comfortable with on the offensive end. Made some nice throws. I still don't feel like they're overly limiting him or treating him with kid gloves, but they're also not asking him to do a ton and putting the ball in the hands of Christian McCaffrey to an almost laughable degree at times. I mean, they were just, feeding Christian McCaffrey throughout this game. And like you said, he showed very few signs of wear and tear.
Yeah, and then I think that other than McCaffrey just being the stud that you took at 1.1, we have some real clarity. For some reason, if Jordan Mason, the rookie, is out there, he needs to be on your Christian McCaffrey team. And again, I doubt he's out there in any competitive league at this point, but he also, had 64 yards. I mean, it's moving forward. This is the guy. And, once again, Tyrion Davis-Price and any third round pick that the 49ers take next year at running back position can obviously be ignored. Right. On the other side, though, Ken Walker, he came back. Fantasy managers were really struggling whether to start him. He only got 47 yards rushing. Didn't do much, but I think the big takeaway from this game is Tyler Lockett, who's basically been a touchdown machine for the Seattle Seahawks. And he did get you 7 for 68 on his 9 targets, but it's unlikely he's going to play next week, Nick.
Yeah, it is. So that is not great news if you're somebody who's kind of been riding a free Geno Smith pickup. I would imagine you probably have other options, so you're not super concerned about that. But potentially good news for DK Metcalf, who both he and Lockett saw a bunch of usage in that game against San Francisco. But overall, I mean, that is a troubling situation for a Seattle team that desperately needs to win, and maybe needs to win out at this point to feel good about making the NFC playoffs. They've completely fallen off over the last month. And to me, Alan, it feels like this dates all the way back to that Germany game against Tampa Bay, where that was kind of the first time that we saw this version of Seattle, where the offensive line feels like it's taken a step back. The defense feels like it's taken a major step back. One of the most improved units in the league over the first half of the season. That's completely fallen off. Geno Smith is making more mistakes than he was earlier in the season. And, yeah, removing Tyler Lockett from that equation is rough.
And then I think that the beneficiary that's actionable from the Tyler Lockett injury is the tight end Noah Fant. As you know, unless you have Travis Kelce and maybe Mark Andrews, and I guess if you stuck with Darren Waller, you are just in tight end hell every single week. So Noah Fant saw 6 targets. He had 5 catches, 32 yards, but he got it in the end zone. So if he's out there and you're one of the teams that just needs a tight end, he could see an uptick in targets. I mean, who else are they going to have? I mean, Marquise Goodwin, I guess, is there. And, so
I kind of like Marquise Goodwin. You had one big game earlier this season when they were dealing with injuries. So, at least the blueprint is potentially there for him. Had 5 for 95 even against Carolina a couple weeks ago. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you're ultimately kind of grasping at straws there. And if you're looking at just the stat breakdown in terms of tight ends, I mean, Seattle uses 3 guys, Dissly, Fant, and Parkinson. They were all used relatively evenly, 37 snaps for Dissly, 33 for Fant, 25 for Colby Parkinson. But Noah Fant targeted 6 times. Dissly and Parkinson targeted 1 time each. So it's pretty clear who they trust more in the passing game.
Saturday afternoon, man, the Colts and the Vikings. Matt Ryan now has the distinguished honor of blowing 2 of the biggest comebacks of all time, meaning that he was on the wrong end of them. Everyone remembers Super Bowl 51 when they were up 28-3. 28-3 is almost like a meme at this point.
It is.
And now
it's definitely a meme.
Right? I mean, you send someone 28-3, they know what you're talking about. Like,
exactly.
You blew it,
Yes.
But this one was even more impressive because it was they were down 33-0. Yeah, 33-0. And then I think they were down 33 points at another point. And then Minnesota, I mean, you were really worried in your Justin Jefferson teams because he went out early and you're like, oh no, you had that Jonathan Taylor situation going on where you thought you were done. And then he comes back with a big game.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, if you had a Jefferson Taylor pairing on your fantasy team, you were in full on panic mode at one point in the first half. I mean, shocking comeback, obviously. Biggest comeback in NFL history. I think you got to give the Vikings credit. At the same time, you also fell behind 33-0 to Matt Ryan at home. I mean, for most of this day, it looked like they were going to have the 2 biggest no-shows of the season, of course, counting the 40-3 game against Dallas. So, if you're Minnesota, you come out of this, I guess it ends up being somewhat of this galvanizing moral victory. But I think you still have major concerns that you were even in that hole in the first place. And I think this is, despite Minnesota ultimately winning the game, it feels like this was just kind of more fodder for the crowd of people who are been calling this Minnesota team frauds all season.
Yeah, but the interesting thing about Minnesota, and I talked about this briefly with Jim on the Sunday show, is Minnesota, they're likely to have the number 2 seed. I think we agree on that. But they're going to have an opponent, a flawed opponent. They're going to have the Giants in round 1. They're going to have the Commanders in round 1. I mean, God forbid it's the Lions, but it might be the Seahawks in round 1. So
could be the Packers.
I'll take the under on that one, Nick.
Okay.
What are they? Yeah, but you're right though. If they win tonight, what are they, 6-8? They're very much alive. So, either way though, the Vikings, for all their flaws, are going to have a very flawed opponent in the first round. So, I still believe that they'll be favored, whether it's a field goal, whether it's 2.5, whether it's 6.5. I don't know. So they can still win a playoff game. Obviously, that's the NFC for you right there. Dalvin Cook, in the preseason, we were advocating for taking him as high as pick 2. That probably wasn't a good idea. But if you got him at pick 9 through 12, sometimes he was dripping into the second round, you at least broke even on that pick.
Yeah, I think at times it's felt like a disappointment for Dalvin Cook, but on the whole, he's having actually kind of a very Ezekiel Elliott-like season, Alan, where I think, week to week, you're sometimes you're thinking, why did I take this guy? But when you take it holistically, he stayed healthy for the most part. That's been big. That sets him apart from a lot of the other running backs who've been disappointments. Fumbles have been an issue. Like, it feels like there are 2 or 3 times this season where if they had just run a normal play, Dalvin Cook could walk in for another touchdown, and that would obviously boost his fantasy numbers. But on the whole, he's been really solid. Really, really solid. Maybe you're not blown away by the production that you're getting from Dalvin Cook, but at the same time, by no means where you were taking him is it going to go down as a bust. And in this game specifically, 4 for 95 and a touchdown through the air, including that long one near the end of the game.
Yes, I think the big takeaway is going to come on the running back side, Nick, for fantasy football. If you had Jonathan Taylor, both Zach Moss had 24
Yep.
carries for 81 yards, Deion Jackson 13 carries for 55 yards. Just looking, neither, I guess they both got involved a little bit in the passing game, but which one of these two running backs, if you absolutely need someone who you think is going to be earmarked for touches, which one of these guys do you want if you're desperate to play them in week 16?
It's interesting because I think earlier in the year, I would have said Deion Jackson, who we saw him for like a game and a half when Taylor was out earlier this year. One of those was against the Jags. Jackson, I thought, actually ran really well in that game. But I think based on what we saw on Saturday afternoon now, and it kind of has to be Moss, right? I mean, he doubled up Deion Jackson in snaps. He ran more routes. He was targeted the same number of times. He had 11 more carries. So, unless that completely reverses next week, which I guess is possible, based on what we saw this past week, I think the Colts trust Zach Moss, or at least feel like maybe he has a little bit more upside. And both of these guys are relatively young. Zach Moss, of course, former Bill, still early in his NFL career. So I think they maybe want to look at both in what's become a lost season down the stretch. But based on what we saw Saturday, I lean Moss.
It's funny. I was going to say Deion Jackson, but the answer might be neither, right? But if you have to get one, I would say that Deion Jackson is the more likely guy to be involved in the passing game, but who's going to own that touchdown equity? That's probably Zach Moss, and that's really the name of the game is touchdowns, and we'll see how that all goes down. And just very quickly before we move on, KJ Osborne, you can't trust him next week, right? I mean, even though he had the monster week, you're not picking him up to play him, right?
It's just awful because I have KJ Osborne on so many teams. He was kind of like my late round dart throw. I'm like, maybe he takes a big step forward this year. Of course, I didn't start him this past week. And no, this seems like a classic kind of what we saw from Evan Ingram 2 weeks ago, where you're like, okay, we know for a fact Evan Ingram's not putting up 37 fantasy points 2 weeks in a row. So yeah, maybe some people will throw him out there, but yeah, this feels like, just a classic example of fantasy fool's gold.
Not to, use a cliche, but classic best ball pick, right? Like you like KJ Osborne in your team.
Oh yeah.
You never know the 2 weeks he's going to pop. So if you were like in, third place, this could have pushed you into the 1 or 2 spot in your best ball league. Nick, we talked a little bit earlier about No House Advantage, and No House Advantage is the game that's changing by offering the most dynamic fantasy sports platform that's available today. You play pick'em contests versus other people for the shot at winning big cash prizes. Download the app, choose a contest, select your player props, earn points for correct picks, and climb the leaderboard. It's your shot at hundreds of thousands of dollars every week. You could test your skills versus the house and 20x your entry if you hit all the picks. Bet on 5-player props, overs or unders, or individual matchups across every major sport, including baseball, basketball, golf, MMA, NASCAR, and of course, football. Sign up with promo code NHAWIRE. That's NHAWIRE at nohouseadvantage.com, or download the app stores, and get your first deposit match up to $25. Make sure to check out No House Advantage today and experience daily fantasy sports redefined. And I highly recommend this game. I've been playing it. It's one of the better prop picking games as far as interface and fluidity of the app. So No House Advantage, we thank them for sponsoring the podcast, but I'm glad that they put me on to the app. I was not aware of them before this year. All right, here we go. Next game was a little bit of a snoozer, but I don't mind games like this. I'm talking, of course, about the Saturday afternoon game, the Ravens and the Browns. What I was looking for was to see if Deshaun Watson is going to basically shake off the rust and become that top 5 fantasy football asset moving forward. And I knew the first couple games, or I had a feeling, were going to be a little iffy. Did you see anything from Watson in the passing game that makes you optimistic about ranking him as a top 5 guy next year, or not so much?
Not yet. I remain open to the possibility that Deshaun Watson can return to being the player that he was, near the end of his healthy tenure in Houston. But we haven't really seen a lot of evidence of that this season. That's for sure. It's been ugly dating back to that debut against Houston. Last week against Cincinnati, looked slightly better. And obviously this was kind of a difficult situation against a Baltimore team that really wanted to grind out this game and slow things down. And look, we got 16 combined points. So they succeeded in that. I had to stream this one at a wedding, Alan, on Saturday. Just a brutal scenario. I'm under the table. I'm like running back and forth to the bathroom.
What was more boring, Nick, the wedding or the game?
Well, I was going to say, of all games to be going on during a wedding, I mean, this was like best case scenario. So I feel like I timed it out well. The reception kind of started right as the night game, Dolphins Bills, was underway. So it was a lot easier for me to keep an eye on that one. But yeah, kind of relieved that there wasn't a ton of scoring here. But no, I don't love what I've seen from Watson, man. He looks tentative. He doesn't look intense. He doesn't really look locked in. I know a lot of people are trying to kind of read into the psychological stuff with Deshaun Watson, and I don't need to get into that. But I would like to see at least like one kind of reminder game from him before the end of the season, because he's had flashes here and there. But I think if you didn't know who Deshaun Watson was, if you had no context for who he'd been in Houston, I don't think anything that he's showed us in Cleveland would imply top 5 quarterback status, whether you're talking real life or fantasy.
I'm really optimistic on Deshaun Watson because he's still in his athletic peak. And like you just said, it's if you just came back from a 3-year vacation and you're like, oh, that's Deshaun Watson. Didn't he used to be good? I think in some of your keeper and dynasty formats that he's absolutely a buy if somebody's getting a little sketched out. If you want to, if usually players like that are not even attainable in your, like, say, your super flex leagues or your, long-term keeper leagues. But there's a window right here to buy if somebody doesn't believe. And listen, it's not often the guy's going from being a top 3, top 5 quarterback to basically just, not even a top 10 quarterback without some sort of injury, or if your name is Russell Wilson. It's one of the two.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're dealing with unique circumstances with Watson. I think to me it's just that he's missed so much time. I mean, I don't care how talented you are, how old you are. If you don't play football for 700 days, it's going to take you a little bit to get it back. So I'm by no means saying that Deshaun Watson is like a completely different player now. We have to take into account as well that, he's moving to a new team. And like you said, we've seen players, whether it's Russell Wilson or other guys who've kind of moved around in their careers. Like, you don't just hit the ground running with a new coaching staff, new teammates, timing with receivers, things like that. I mean, he's played 3 games essentially for the Browns, didn't play much in the preseason. So I'm with you. If I'm in a dynasty league, I would happily try to acquire him at a slight discount.
And those of you in the chat, let us know also if you think Deshaun Watson can get back to top 5 status. We're curious on what everybody else thinks. Nick, the other takeaway that I wrote down for this game was J.K. Dobbins is back. And I think that if we go back to August, and I was very much cautioning anyone who listens to RotoWire content to not draft J.K. Dobbins at his 5th round price. And it was because I didn't like J.K. Dobbins. It's just that the guy was having some issues with his recovery in the preseason from the ACL. And I'm usually I'm fading injury optimism. And most of the time you're going to make money in fantasy football. Fading injury optimism, and I think that we're going to have to apply that to some of the guys like Kyler Murray for next year. Yep. I would doubt if he's ready for week 1. If he is he going to be, up? Is he going to be Kyler Murray? But sticking with J.K. Dobbins, have you seen now enough? He had another 100+ yard rushing performance. It was high efficiency, but are you confident enough in him right now? If we were doing a draft for next year, is he a top 10 back, a top 12 back? Is he a 2nd round pick? What's your stance on J.K. Dobbins? Is he back?
I think he's on the verge of being back. I'd like to see one more of these games, but like you said, he basically put in exactly the performance that we saw last week against Pittsburgh. There's some commentary that maybe the top end speed wasn't there, but I think with Dobbins, that's fine. You don't think you're drafting a guy who's essentially running away from the pack. He's more of a between the tackles guy anyway, but to me, I don't know if I'm taking him in the 2nd round. I think he's probably closer to the top 12 to 14 conversation for me. And part of it is, it feels like even when he's been healthy, we haven't seen a fully healthy Ravens backfield. And I think part of the reason, injuries aside, that there's been a little bit of caution around Dobbins is just wondering, okay, what's the breakdown here? Like when all their backs are healthy, is he the guy? Because it's such a unique offense. They've used multiple backs. Everybody's been hurt for the last 2 years. So it feels like we haven't really gotten an accurate look at this backfield. But even with Lamar Jackson out of this game, maybe this is what it's going to look like, right? If it's J.K. Dobbins as the number 1, Gus Edwards as the clear number 2, and then maybe you sneak in Justice Hill, you sneak in Kenyon Drake here and there. If this is a distribution, then I'm comfortable with it. But I don't know. I'm not taking him in the 2nd round. I think I'm waiting until 3rd round and beyond.
Yeah, I think that's probably more where the market will be. And just while we're just talking briefly about this, I mean, the next game we're going to talk about is the Saturday night main event, which of course was Miami and Buffalo. Do you think any quarterbacks in single quarterback redraft leagues are 1st round picks? That was a talk about 2 months ago. I would still say no way. But do you think in some leagues it's actually going to happen? Like Josh Allen or whoever your QB1 is at like pick 11?
I think it's going to happen, yes. Would I do it? Probably not. But I will say I've been burned in a few leagues where I felt really comfortable waiting to grab Matthew Stafford or waiting to grab Russell Wilson or Tom Brady, So like that's going to be in the back of my mind when we're doing these 2023 drafts. And we talked to Scott Pianowski on the SXM show, Tom Kesnick from NFFC about this. And they're kind of on our side here with, I think one of the big trends we're going to see is kind of this reversal on the discount of quarterbacks, because if you have Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, or Josh Allen, and sometimes Joe Burrow, he's worked his way into that conversation. If you have one of those three guys, I mean, that is just such a huge advantage week to week. I mean, that is like a free +10 if your opponent is starting Tom Brady. So yeah, I absolutely think we're going to see those three quarterbacks specifically start to come off the board at the end of the first round. I think especially with how many running backs, like the Jonathan Taylor situation, for example, like I think people are kind of sick of getting burned with these high running backs. And I think quarterbacks who in general are healthier with the way that the NFL protects quarterbacks, I think it's a safer investment, even if, you start to look at the opportunity cost equations.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's not that they score more points. It's about, what's available later. Like, is Justin Fields in the 4th or 5th round a better pick? Those are the type of equations we're going to have to work out as early best ball season starts. Saturday night main event. I mean, I have one team, Nick, that has like all of the Miami and Buffalo guys. I mean, who cares about my team? Well, actually, everyone cares about my team. This is very important to the world. But I have like a super flex team with Tua and Josh Allen, and then I have all the receivers, the Miami receivers and Stephon Diggs. So everyone got paid in this game, including Dawson Knox, who you probably didn't start because he goose-egged last week. What's your one big takeaway from Saturday night?
My one big takeaway is that I did not think Miami would compete in this game in the way that it did. And, the Dolphins had a pretty good chance to win. Obviously, Buffalo puts together what's becoming kind of a signature late in the game field goal drive, killing clock, really well managed. I mean, 15-play drive to go down and win that game late. But I really thought Miami would struggle in this environment. I did not think it was a good spot for Tua. I was all over the Tua under on the yardage prop, which I think somehow still hit. It was hanging around 235, and he got to 234. But I was impressed with how Miami came out. They were able to run the ball on Buffalo as well. So even though Miami loses this game, they are starting to lose some momentum these last few weeks. They showed much better than I expected. What about you?
I agree, especially with the weather. I was not expecting them to perform well in the weather. The one thing I wanted to ask you about this game was I didn't fully understand. I understood why Devin Singletary didn't run in for the touchdown, but I didn't necessarily agree with why he did it or the situation. I mean, if you remember on Saturday night, Singletary, with the game tied, basically fell down at the 4-yard line, did the Brian Westbrook so they could kick the field goal. But in those conditions, one, what if there was a missed field goal, even though it was a very short field goal, and then challenging Tua to go 80 yards the other way? I probably would have said, Singletary, go score, and let's see if Tua can run the other way 80 yards or, lead that drive. So listen, it worked out for them. I just didn't understand the equation of risk versus reward. Did you have a similar thought there, or you thought they played it exactly right?
I think players are just like scared now because we've seen it happen a couple times. Like Mark Ingram, running out of bounds a couple weeks ago against Tampa. The Nick Chubb play earlier this year. Like there's 3 or 4 of those. So I think if you're a running back, you're on high alert. Like you don't want to be the guy who's blamed if all of a sudden you score and then the other team comes down and finds a way to tie it. So like you said, it ended up working out, but I'm with you, like with the elements and, you're kicking a rock hard football at that point in the night. I would totally okay. It's not like he was going to run that in with a minute and a half left. I think it would have been closer to like 20 seconds. So at that point, I think if you can't trust your kick coverage and you can't trust your prevent defense, I would have been totally fine with him punching that in. I think bringing it all the way down, I guess, and not even leaving the possibility of some crazy lateral play. I understand that. But like I said, with 20 seconds left, I think you'll trust your defense.
Yeah, absolutely there. Would you trust Raheem Mostert next week if you have him on your roster? He had 136 rushing yards. I mean, I did not expect him to go nuclear like that. If you have if you have some tough start-sit decisions, I mean, is he running back 12 next week? Is he running back 18? I mean, just anecdotally, without having done a deep analysis, are you trusting him in the fantasy semifinal?
Well, the big thing is we need to find out what's up with Jeff Wilson, right? And if he's inactive again, I think that makes it a lot easier to ride with Mostert. Fantastic matchup against Green Bay. I think that's the number one thing. So, yes, if Wilson is out, I'm happy to trust Mostert. This is a Packers rush defense that has been gashed over and over and over. And even though the offense is picking up steam for Green Bay, I don't know that we could say the same thing about the defense. Still a decent amount of attrition there. This game is at home in Miami. They always seem to play better there. So, yeah, I think this is actually a pretty good spot on paper for Raheem Mostert, assuming Wilson is still banged up.
The RotoWire Fantasy Football Top 10 Takeaways and Review podcast is also brought to you by Monkey Knife Fight. On Monkey Knife Fight, there's no sharks, no salary caps, and no math. You can play NFL football. You can play college football. It's easy to play and to win daily fantasy player props. Join now at monkeyknifefight.com, and you'll get your first game free. Then use promo code RWNFL to get your first deposit match instantly up to $100. So what are you waiting for? Join Monkey Knife Fight today. All right, Nick, let's get into this Sunday slate with our top 10 takeaways. There's a lot to unpack here. Specifically, well, actually, you know what? I want to start with a game that no one was looking forward to, I think, except me. I was looking forward to this Atlanta versus New Orleans game because I wanted to see what Desmond Ridder had, and he was a flat tire. Now, I'm going to give him a little bit of a pass. It's his first NFL start. He's a third-round rookie. But I thought that he would show a little bit more here. But once again, it was all about the running game. And head coach Arthur Smith refused to put to start Desmond Ridder over Marcus Mariota until they were basically out of it. Did you see anything on the Atlanta side and from Desmond Ridder, whether how he got the ball to Drake London? I mean, it would have been nice if Kyle Pitts was still there. What was your top takeaway from the Atlanta side of this game?
You know what? I was surprised that Atlanta still played this game pretty conservatively. Really kept the ball on the ground to an extreme degree. I mean, 39 carries for 231 yards as a team. It was a nice day for Algier, decent day for Cordero Patterson. Ridder himself, I think a lot more mobile than he gets credit for. He ran 6 times for 38 yards. Yeah, the final numbers are ugly. There were to me, it felt like he was just constantly under siege. He was sacked 4 times, probably could have been sacked 8 times, hanging onto the ball a little bit too long, starting to drift toward the sideline, things that you typically see from rookie quarterbacks. So to me, it went about as expected. I was with you. I kind of had slightly higher hopes just because Ridder had shown some progress in the preseason, but he hasn't taken a single snap since that final preseason game. So totally warranted that he might be a little bit rusty and a little bit green. I think Atlanta losing this game, if you just look at the box score, pretty ugly. The Falcons had a very good chance to come down and potentially have Desmond Ridder lead a game-tying, if not game-winning drive late in this game, but completed a pass on 4th down to Drake London. He gets stripped. New Orleans goes the other way, essentially ends up running out the clock. So it did feel like we were robbed of some dramatics at the end of this one. But I think if you're Atlanta, you come away and say, yeah, this is probably about what we expected. And were you really going to get a better showing out of Marcus Mariota? Ultimately, I doubt it.
Yeah, you have at least Drake London got his 11 targets. I think that's a takeaway as well, that Desmond Ridder knows where the bread is going to be buttered. He caught 7 of them for 70 yards, and that's reassuring. On the other side of the ball, Rashid Shaheed, man, 3 catches for 95 yards and a touchdown. The big takeaway here, Nick, is I think that it limits Chris Olave's upside. I mean, if you drafted Chris Olave, and I believe he'll be like a 4th-round pick next year, I mean, people are going to really want Chris Olave on their team. He's been great for you all year. But this is a little concerning that they have another player, which again, eventually he's going to have to share their field with somebody. Right. We'll see what happens when they get a real quarterback in there. Now, here's an interesting stat from the NFC South. Bill Simmons had this on his podcast this morning. So we all know how bad that the NFC South has been. Here's their record right now, and this is per Bill Simmons' podcast. It's 21-35 against the NFL, and if you take out, he said the divisional opponents, they're 12-26. I mean, that's how bad that division has been right there. So somebody's gonna be the divisional champion. I mean, it'll be interesting. I don't think anyone wants Tampa in there. I mean, Panthers didn't do themselves any favors, so it's really pathetic. The Saints are still alive at 5-9. The big takeaway there is that this is going to be someone with with 7 wins might end up being the division champion. All right, moving along, Nick. This is a game that I know you probably watch very closely as a hardcore Jaguars fan.
Yeah.
Dallas and the Jags. What a finish in overtime.
Ooh.
Jags 40-34 defeat the Cowboys. Trevor Lawrence, 318 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. Only 1 pick. He's got to be the big takeaway now. You have to be. I mean, everyone needs to be sold that Trevor Lawrence is arrived. He's an elite quarterback that hasn't even touched his upside yet.
I think we can officially say it. And I've been, kind of biting my tongue these last few weeks as he started to play better, but just kind of waiting for that implosion game to come. And maybe we've reached the point where he finally has turned the corner. It truly does feel that way. If you're going to watch one highlight from this game, watch the kind of rollout throw to Zay Jones down the sideline for a long touchdown in the second half. I mean, that was a wow play for Trevor Lawrence, who, as well as he's played, he doesn't really have those like Mahomes, Herbert, like, wow, crazy throw. He just does everything really well. I mean, this was one of those games where he was, I think, kind of starting to display a little flashiness, which you don't typically associate with Trevor Lawrence or anyone who's ever played quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars. But yeah, I mean, this was really for the second week in a row, the type of game that Jacksonville typically does not win. Going down early against Tennessee, looks like they're going to get run all over. Derrick Henry's going to have 250 yards. All of a sudden, you force 4 turnovers and you win that game in a blowout. It looked like they were going to be blown out at one point in this game as well. Like, the resilience that the Jaguars have shown to me it's just so unlike this team over the last couple of decades. And I'm kind of struggling to discern how much of it is Doug Peterson, how much of it was this team actually better than it should have been last season, and the coaching just really dragged them down. But either way, I mean, they're playing with confidence. Tennessee ends up losing in the late window to the Chargers. All of a sudden, we have one game, Alan, separating the Titans and the Jags, who do play in Week 18.
And Jags have the schedule cleared for them, basically. They're set up to win the rest of their games, and they're very much alive in that AFC South. Now, we talked about the NFC South. The AFC South is not much better right now. And again, this is per Bill Simmons' podcast on the Monday edition. Their AFC South is 18-36-2. Take out the divisional opponents, and they're 11-29. So the South divisions are not doing well. If you combine both of those from the stats we laid out before, they're 23-55. But meanwhile, there's going to be a division winner, and there's going to be 2 playoff teams that are right now going to be in there
and hosting playoff games.
Yep. And I've heard some pushback on that. If you don't have a winning record, people feel that you shouldn't host a playoff game. I think I'm all for if you win the division, and because that's what football set up for. Right. Basically, you should host your playoff game. And who knows? It's the NFL. It'll only be one game. Anything can happen. Yep. You mentioned Zay Jones. Zay Jones, league winner, 3 touchdowns. I mean, people were complaining, self included, that they overpaid for Zay Jones. He's come through for fantasy football. It's been a little hard to know when to play him. But I think people were shoving them into their lineups this week. I went against the Zay Jones teams, and I felt the knockout punch pretty early with that second touchdown. Zay Jones will be 27 or 28 next year when the season starts. Now, you're going to have the Jaguars are going to have Zay. They're going to have Christian Kirk. And then presumably they're going to remember Calvin Ridley's coming back. I mean, we could see a Deshaun Watson rust thing happen, but Calvin Ridley, even though he's a little bit older, 28, 29 years old, he's still on his rookie contract because he came into the league as a rookie. I mean, he's an older rookie, right. But last year doesn't count towards his accrued years for obvious reasons. He was suspended. You have to be optimistic about the pass catching core moving forward. And really, the other takeaway that I wanted to ask you was, even though Travis Etienne had 103 yards on 19 carries, why hasn't he been involved in the passing game? I mean, 2 receptions for 24 yards. I thought he would be like a 7 or 8 reception guy.
I thought so too. Jeff brings this up all the time on SXM. I mean, he has no more than 3 catches in any game this season, and he's only been targeted more than 4 times twice. So it's not like they're trying and it's not working. It just hasn't really been a part of what they do. That they've kind of turned him into more of a traditional running back, and he's so talented and so shifty that it's working out. But I think they need to kind of have a more Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara type of mindset with ETN. Like he has a decent amount of power packed into a relatively small frame, but I don't really think you want him, pounding into the line on 2nd and 10. Like I think you got to get him out in space, quick passes, screens, things of that nature. So yeah, hopefully I think that's something that they continue to implement. That was such a huge part of his profile when he played with Lawrence at Clemson. So I would imagine that comes. But yeah, for fantasy, I mean, it does hamstring you a little bit. He had the 2 catches for 24 yards, but doesn't have a receiving TD on the year. We should mention that fumbles continue to be an issue for ETN. Had another killer fumble earlier in this game that looked like it was kind of going to set off a chain reaction of the Cowboys running away. But obviously he gets it together and getting over the century mark against this Cowboys defense. I did not think this was going to be a great spot for ETN. I mean, he had really struggled essentially 4 games in a row coming into this. So, I said to Jeff, if the Jags have any chance to hang around in this game, they need to get the ground game going. And they did. Zay Jones, by the way, top 20 receiver in PPR on the year. He ranks ahead of Michael Pittman. He ranks ahead of Chris Godwin. He ranks ahead of Chris Olave, Mike Evans, Juju Smith, Deebo Samuel. I could keep going, but top 20 receiver.
Victory lap, Zay Jones. I love it. That's why the people come to the RotoWire podcast. Lightning round of questions on the Cowboys side before we move over. So 1-word answers. Who will get drafted first next year if everything stays the same with the Cowboys? Zeke or Tony Pollard?
Depends if it's you or I doing the drafting, but in
one
general,
word.
I think Tony Pollard.
Tony Pollard. Okay. Zeke, by the way, 7 straight games with a touchdown, 9 TDs in the last 7 games. I mean, he's been everything that we thought he was going to be, which wasn't a league winner, Nick. He was just a stabilizer. So I still think he'll break even where he was. And then the other takeaway from this game is that Peyton Hendershot caught a touchdown. He only had 1 catch for 20 yards, but I think that basically is going to assure the Cowboys that they don't need to re-sign for big money Dalton Schultz next year with all the other issues they're going to have with their cap. All right, let's talk about Detroit and the New York Jets. Zach Wilson, I don't think was the reason the team lost this game. I mean, I know there's a lot of shade being thrown at Zach Wilson. There definitely seemed to be some coaching decisions that were a little questionable right here. While I just go fix this one lamp right here, I want you to tell me why you think the Jets blew it in this game.
The Jets absolutely blew this game, and I think they were put in a bad spot having to start Zach Wilson. I took the Jets and staff picks and felt fairly confident about it when we thought that Mike White would be the starter. Obviously, I went into a minor panic when we had the rug pulled out from under us. But they give up the punt return touchdown on just a terrible situation. You're punting from like the half-yard line. Punter just kind of gets it out of there. Can't really blame him. It wasn't a great punt by any means, but you're just trying not to get that blocked. So they basically handed Detroit a free touchdown early in this game. And I will push back a little bit. I know Wilson maybe was not single-handedly responsible for losing this game, but he certainly didn't help him, Alan. And I'll tell you what, for a Jags fan with the Jaguars playing the Jets this Thursday night, I am hoping and praying that it's Zach Wilson under center instead of Mike White. So I think that kind of tells you how much differently we feel about this Jets team when it is Wilson. Like, he's still doing his running 10 yards behind the line of scrimmage. He's kind of falling out of bounds as he's throwing. Like, he's not comfortable in the pocket whatsoever. And that continues to be a major issue when you're dropping 10 yards back on a 3rd and 7. All of a sudden you need to throw the ball twice as long. So he made some plays late in this game, floated one. I think it was to Garrett Wilson late in the game that did set up a field goal try. So you got to give him some credit, but had a really, really bad interception early in the 3rd quarter. I thought the Jets defense showed up. I think holding Detroit to 20 points with how well Detroit's been playing offensively and conditions that didn't end up being that bad out in New Jersey. The Jets probably should have won this game. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, the Jets defense, it's funny. I'm in one of these deep dynasty leagues where every defense is rostered. In the beginning of the season, there was one defense that was on the waiver wire. It was the Jets, which means that nobody had confidence the Jets were even going to be good. They are actually one of the 2 defenses in fantasy football that you proactively avoid if you can, right? I mean, San Francisco's defense and the Jets defense, you're like, right, oh, crap, I have to play them. I mean, obviously, you're not going to bench someone like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who do get 7 for 76. But as we've been spoiled, 7 for 76 is an okay game for Amon-Ra St. Brown. We want 10 for 105 and a touchdown. Khalif Raymond was the second best receiver. And again, I think he had a big touchdown return. Was it a touchdown on his punt return? I don't remember exactly. Or he had a big return.
A short punt out of the end zone. Yeah, it was about as short of a punt return as you're ever going to see. He caught it at like the 45.
Yep. Bam Knight. My other takeaway, even though it was a bad game, he still got fed like a workhorse. He led the team in touches again with 13 touches, only 23 yards. Again, it was a bad game for him, but I think that that he is heavily he's going to be involved next year. So if the Breece Hall recovery goes well, and it was a late season injury, I don't think Breece Hall is going to be 100%. This is the same thing we talked about with J.K. Dobbins last year. Breece Hall is not a player I'm going to be taking in the second or third round. And as the reports get good, if there's positive reports on Hall, he's going to get elevated next year. And he's a player I'm probably going to fade, especially since this is probably a three-man committee next season. That was the big take. Also, the big takeaway is Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift. Swift is still not a player I can fully trust. It's too hot and cold. I can't imagine that you have anyone that you feel better about on your fantasy team. But overall, next year, I don't think DeAndre Swift, I think all those truthers, self-included, are not going to be shoving him into the second round. He is basically out of the fantasy circle of trust. All right, Nick, let's move along to the next one. And what was the one that I want? Oh, you know what? Houston and Kansas City. Houston has proven that they can hang with all the big boys. Now, I don't know if that is because that teams don't take them seriously and they look past the game, but they scared the life out of both Dallas and Kansas City. So it just goes to show that even the worst teams in the NFL can hang with the big boys, right? In this game right here, you had Chris Moore. He was a popular plug and play. He was okay for fantasy football. I mean, it's he didn't come through like he did the week before. I'm looking right here. Let's see. Chris Moore. He had 9 targets. So Jim and I were talking about with the over was 7.5. I took the over. He took the under, but only had 4 for 42. The rest of the fantasy output was nothing that you probably even played. Some people were playing Jeff Driscoll at tight end in the Yahoo leagues. That ended up being a big bust. But I really want to talk about the other side. So Mahomes, he gets his numbers at 336 and 2, but Pacheco, 15 carries for 86 yards. McKinnon, we're going to talk about him in detail. He's been RB1 the last 2 weeks. League winner. Hello. Hopefully he wasn't on your bench after last week. So, yes, McKinnon's an auto start in week 16, wouldn't you say?
I think he has to be at this point, right? And, you look at Patrick Mahomes' line, 36 of 41 in this game for 336. Obviously, he's an accurate downfield quarterback, but a lot of these are short passes. And McKinnon, he's benefited from that. I think they still love what Pacheco gives them as more of a traditional running back, but we've seen McKinnon heavily, heavily involved as Kansas City has kind of leaned into this short pass game that they used last week against Denver as well. And, McKinnon, it is crazy. Like, he was pretty clearly the third most intriguing back in this backfield coming in. Nobody's really talking about McKinnon, and here we are now when it matters most. And they have put a ton of trust in Jerick McKinnon. I will say on the Houston side, I did not see this coming. I thought last week was kind of their Super Bowl game, their final hurrah, one final chance to beat a good team. It wouldn't really affect their draft position anyway. I thought this was going to be a big-time letdown spot for the Texans. I mean, the Chiefs almost had their letdown last week. I didn't think they'd let their guard down 2 weeks in a row, but you're right. I think we have to you got to give props to the one win Houston Texans, Alan. They have not been blown out in like 8 weeks. They found ways to stay competitive.
Yeah, so let's say they have the first overall pick, Houston, in the draft next year. There's a couple good quarterback prospects, and we're not going to get too deep into this in this podcast on what the prospects are, but there's the quarterback from Alabama, Bryce Young, and CJ Stroud out of Ohio State, and then Anthony Richardson is out of Florida. He's top 5-ish. So that's the buzz right now, is that he's going to be a top 5, top 10 pick. So you have 3 guys to choose from. 2 great options according so far, and 1 okay option if you want to move back. Is Houston pressing the button on a quarterback, or is this a situation where they just need so many things that they would consider moving back, maybe taking, and just getting a boatload of assets? I guess really my question for you, since you watch a lot of college football, are either of the 2 big prospects worth the number 1 pick? Are these Trevor Lawrence level prospects?
Trevor Lawrence level, maybe not. I think in terms of talent, Bryce Young is absolutely on that level. I think the big question with Bryce Young is the size. If he was 2 inches taller and 15 pounds heavier, I think we would be talking about him in that same breath as Trevor Lawrence. So I think Houston absolutely goes quarterback. It is worth noting they also have the Browns pick, which, depending on what Cleveland does these next few weeks, that could be another top 10 pick. As of right now, it would be the 13th pick based on Cleveland winning, but that's going to change week to week. So I think they could kind of use that second pick to go best player available, maybe add something on defense to go with Derek Stingley, a high pick from last year. But I would be shocked if they traded out, unless you're only trading down a spot or two. Maybe they prefer Stroud. Maybe they prefer Richardson. Maybe they prefer Will Levis from Kentucky. So if there's a team that's in love with Bryce Young, I could see them moving a couple spots. But I think the most likely scenario is they hold that pick and they take a quarterback.
All right. So back to this game. Big takeaway, Jerick McKinnon auto start for next week, right? In the fantasy semifinal. Total confidence?
I think so. You get Seattle, too. I mean, there's not many better matchups right now than that Seattle defense.
Right. So if you're sitting there and you have Ken Walker, if you have like these guys that haven't performed and you're like, hey, Ken Walker, league winner, or, if you have Jerick McKinnon and he was just a week 14 waiver wire pickup, sometimes what we do is the guys we drafted, we have this bias that we should play them. Play your studs. No, you have to really take a look at this thing. And Nick, I think you said it perfectly, is the team trusts him more than any other player other than Travis Kelce. So that's the big takeaway here. Let's talk about the Chicago Bears Philly game, which was competitive for a while. And the big takeaway is Jalen Hurts is I would say, last week he solidified himself as the MVP frontrunner. Did he do enough in this game? What did he have? He had 3 rushing touchdowns. Right now, if you're placing a bet, he's still the favorite, right? For MVP, Jalen Hurts?
I'm looking at the fantastic betting hub over at RotoWire.com, which has been built out very nicely by our tech team. And he is the favorite. He's at minus 150, Patrick Mahomes plus 165. And then you got Josh Allen and Joe Burrow at 10-1. So the odds would imply that it's a 2-man race with Allen and Burrow, still lurking in the background. I think Hurts, had a chance to really establish himself in this game, especially with Mahomes coming off of a 3-interception game last week. Chiefs, struggling against the Houston Texans, and Hurts threw a couple of picks early in this game. Didn't really look all that dialed in. A couple miscommunications that we haven't really seen from him this season. But then, like you said, even in what feels like a down week for Philadelphia, you look at the raw numbers and 3 rushing touchdowns for Hurts, still finished with 315 yards. So to me, I'm totally fine with Hurts being the MVP frontrunner. I think there's kind of this narrative starting to evolve of like, well, Patrick Mahomes is actually better than Jalen Hurts. Like, yeah, he is. If I had to choose which one I wanted quarterbacking my team, I would take Mahomes every day of the week. But I do think Jalen Hurts has had the better season.
Right. It's the Michael Jordan thing, right? Like Michael Jordan should have been MVP. LeBron should have been MVP every single year in that.
Don't even get me started on this.
Right. Oh, so this is something that so are you on the side of the best player should be MVP as long as the team is not, a total crap team? Is that where you fall on
Not
this?
necessarily, because I think that you get a scenario where like Michael Jordan wins 15 straight MVPs, same with LeBron. Like, no, LeBron has just been robbed of a couple. I'll leave it at that.
All right. Looks like a trigger alert. All right. So AJ Brown, 9 for 181. Devontae Smith, as long as Dallas Goedert isn't there, he gets paid too. 5 for 126, 16 and 8 targets respectively. AJ Brown, first round pick next year.
I think he's going to be back end of the first round, right? I think the only thing that would prevent that is the fact that you could make a case for like 4 other receivers, to go even before him. It's like, Jefferson, Hill, Diggs, Devontae Adams. Obviously, Cooper Kupp will be back in the mix. It's like at some point it just becomes a math equation, and how many of those guys can ultimately go in the first round when we're talking about Josh Allen potentially sneaking his way into the first round, and Austin Eckler or Josh Jacobs, So to me, I think we're going to start to see some of those running backs maybe lose some value, push down half a round or so, and then someone like AJ Brown, kind of emerges as in that 10 to 12 range.
Here's the top takeaway for next year in early best ball drafts. You want pick 9 through 12. You're going to be fine. There's sure. And if you want Justin Jefferson, sure. I believe he will be the consensus 1.1. We'll get into all that in later podcasts, not so much on the reviews, but there you go. The Bears side, Justin Fields looks awesome as far as fantasy football. There's still a little left to be desired. That run that he had, Nick, where it didn't count and he stepped outside, that was one of the best quarterback. That was almost like Beastquake mode level from a couple of years ago. I was so pissed when did he step out? Was that a legitimate step out of bounds?
Technically it was. He still got like 40 yards on the play. He stepped out at like the 5-yard line. But yeah, it was right before, I think, the final spin move that would have put him into the end zone. Either way, that was the play of the year, man. And that was one of like 5 times that you thought the Eagles had Fields dead to rights, had him down for a sack. And guys just continue, I think, to underestimate how strong and how unbalanced he is. And you even see it on, these kind of design keepers where he'll roll out and try to get to the sideline. And time after time after time, you'll see defenders who are, relatively fast for their position take an angle and then just realize immediately, like, this guy's way faster than I thought. And he's just beating guys to the edge constantly. So I'm with you. I came away really impressed with Justin Fields. I mean, the raw numbers passing are very Justin Fieldsian. Tacked on a semi-garbage time touchdown at the end of the game. Some big-time confusion on the Philadelphia defense. But for Philly to avoid a letdown here, I think this was big because a lot of things went wrong for the Eagles. They had a really bad Miles Sanders fumble late in this game that allowed Chicago to get back in. Like we said, slow start with the 2 picks for Jalen Hurts. But the Eagles just do what they've done all year. With the exception of that Washington game, they just continue to find ways.
The other takeaway that I had was that, the obvious takeaway is that they need wide receiver help. I'm talking about Chicago. Yes. And they gave basically what's going to be a top 35 pick away for 1 year of Chase Claypool. I thought that was a disaster at the time. They traded their 2023 second round pick for Chase Claypool, who's only under contract control for 1 more year. Very bad. I mean, when you think about the players in the past that have gone in that range of the draft, you're talking about T. Higgins, Christian Watson. And to get a player of that caliber with upside of that caliber on a 4 or 5 year rookie contract, I mean, so much more value than a prospect like Chase Claypool, who again has been disappointment. There was some talk that he couldn't grasp the playbook. That one blows my mind. Let's move on to Pittsburgh and the Panthers. Now, the Panthers were a team that everybody's been rooting for to win that division with Sam Darnold. On the Pittsburgh side, there was some, Kenny Pickett was out. So it was Mitch Trubisky. There was some threat that Mason Rudolph was going to be the quarterback if Mitch Trubisky was on a, quote, short leash. Nobody wanted to see that. Actually, I wanted to see that. I like what
I love that you use the word threat because that's exactly how it felt. Like, we will use him. So don't think we won't.
We'll use him. We'll ruin everyone's fantasy value.
Yes, I personally felt threatened by the possibility of Mason Rudolph playing.
Yep. Here's a couple of the takeaways that I wrote down for this one. Najee Harris looks healthy again, 24 carries, 86 yards, and a touchdown. Jaylen Warren obviously had double-digit carries, and he scored. So Najee Harris, I think we had it right on the talent, but it just wasn't a good pick in the first or second round based on, we heard before draft season the words Liz Frank. We don't ever want to hear Liz Frank and first-round pick together. And then Deontay Johnson, though he had a great PPR day, 10 for 98 he caught all 10 of his targets, still doesn't have a touchdown this year. I mean, he has that Julio Jones allergy to the end zone. I'm not sure. What do you think that is? What's the reason Deontay Johnson has? I think he's about to set the record for number of targets without a touchdown if he hasn't already.
It is wild. And I think more than anything, it's just a little bit fluky. I mean, it's kind of the same reason that, like, it feels like Justin Jefferson should have 15 touchdowns and he has 7. Same with Tyreek Hill only having 7. I know Hill, I think, only had like 2 red zone targets midway through the year. So I think a big part of it is incompetent quarterback play, right? Extremely conservative game plan in Pittsburgh. And, like last week, for example, Mitch Trubisky threw 3 interceptions at the Baltimore 9, the Baltimore 10, and the Baltimore goal line. I mean, it's just like that. It's been a comedy of errors for Pittsburgh in that area all season. When they get down there, they run the ball, they throw to Pat Freiermuth. It's really hard to say. And, the other thing is, I think they kind of have a rival for the jump ball scenarios in George Pickens. Like, all of a sudden he's become that guy. It's like, all right, if we're going to throw a fade in the end zone, it's not going to Deontay Johnson anymore. It's going to George Pickens.
Yeah, the other takeaways is DJ Moore made a great touchdown catch. He needs consistent quarterback play. Even though I was not on board with drafting him in the 3rd round aggressively, I understand why people did. He's still young enough where I think that if they can upgrade their quarterback next year, that he's going to be in a really good spot for fantasy football, and the hype will begin again. All right, the one of the most strange endings of any game, and it's been beat to death, plowed over, but we're going to do it as well, was the Patriots and Raiders game. What everyone saw the ending there where they obviously just should have taken a knee and gone to overtime. Have you seen any media yet or post-game interviews with Jacoby Myers to why he threw that ball just so recklessly? What was his rationale or reason?
So, I think the number one thing as you're watching was, did he forget that the game was tied? Did he think they absolutely needed to score a touchdown or they were going to lose? And the answer appears to be no. And you do have to give, I guess, some degree of credit to Jacoby Myers for owning up to it, being honest, giving his full post-game interview. He literally said the words, look, I was just trying to be a hero. And, my guess is you forget he was not the initial handler of the ball. Like he gets it pitched to him from Ramondre Stevenson. And I think at that point, you probably just have a minor panic and you're thinking, oh boy, the ball was just pitched to me. I should pitch it to somebody else. He did say, quote, "I thought I saw Mac Jones open." You threw the ball 20 yards backwards, dude. So like, even if Mac Jones does catch it at the 50-yard line, where is he going? We saw Mac Jones run a bootleg like a few plays earlier where 90% of quarterbacks are able to get the edge and probably run for a first down. And Mac Jones ended up doing like this sad, like turtling spin move. So even if Mac Jones catches that ball, like, what are you doing? It's not like he can just throw it back the other way. Obviously, he was about to just get tackled no matter what. So to me, it was just a guy who just kind of had a lapse and kind of forgot what was going on for a second. Credit to him for owning up to it. It might be the dumbest way I've ever seen a game end. It really might. I think this might top the Miami Dolphins lateral play against these very Patriots from a few years ago.
Depending on if you had the Raiders money line or the Patriots money line in that game, you had very different reactions. I saw this great video sent out by Barstool, which was split screen with two guys that had opposite sides of the bet, and then they showed the reaction video. Very funny to watch there. Maybe it's just poor coaching. I mean, why even run the ball when you could have just taken a knee? I mean, running the play was a called run for Ramondre. What were you hoping to do anyway at that point? So usually Bill Belichick teams are elite coached. This one looked, like it was like Mike McCarthy coached at some point there. So that the big takeaway is Ramondre Stevenson, I believe, is like a top 10 running back for next year. Another 172 yards and a touchdown and 19 carries. I know they're going to have some promising guys like Pierre Strong and Kevin Harris there next year. Damian Harris likely will not be re-signed there with all the running back talent they have. So I'm in on Ramondre as a top 12 back next year, and I think you're going to see him for running back heavy drafters possibly make it onto that 1-2 turn, more likely the second round or third round in early drafts. All right, Nick, we're going to speed through a couple of these rounds in order to keep the podcast nice and tight. Denver, Arizona. Top line, this one, it was 24-15. Denver, we had the battle of the backup quarterbacks, and then Trace McSorley makes it in. Give me one big takeaway from each side of the football that you saw from these two teams.
Well, you're putting me in a tough spot here trying to find real takeaways from a game that featured Trace McSorley at quarterback for most of the second half. Colt McCoy went out with a concussion. McSorley did not look great. He is mobile. That's the selling point with him, but threw 2 picks that essentially lost Arizona this game, or at least removed any shot of the Cardinals finding a way to win. Pretty depressing performance by Arizona. Obviously, again, not having Kyler Murray, then going down to your third quarterback, it's tough to come down too hard on any of the numbers. But I really hope that we would see, DeAndre Hopkins and Marquise Brown together. That was my big observation from last week. Of course, Kyler going out kind of ruined that. And for the rest of the year, it feels like Hopkins, the upside is just not going to be there. Same with Hollywood Brown. I mean, who knows if Colt McCoy even plays next week. So this season is very quickly unraveled and now completely gotten away from Arizona. On the Denver side, nice game for Jerry Jeudy, 7 for 76, get with Brett Rypien throwing him the ball, not nearly the highs of last week, but still nice to see him stringing together some encouraging games with Cortland Sutton out. Latavius Murray, 24 for 130 and a touchdown. Marlon Mack also had a touchdown in this game. The Latavius Murray renaissance, I think, has to be the number one takeaway for Denver.
Yeah, Latavius Murray. It's funny. It's like we're trying to figure out midway through the season who's the running back, who's the quote league winner, who's the guy on this running back I should roster. Who's the running back 3 on this roster? Should this happen and this happen? Sometimes it's the running back 0, meaning the guy who's not even on the roster. You remember that Latavius Murray was a New Orleans Saint put back on their practice squad before he was poached by Denver, and now he's I'm in some of these leagues, Nick. I know you are too, where you have 3 flexes and it's a 14-team league and you're just trying to find body. It's Latavius Murray has been one of the right answers. He's the new Frank Gore, right? Everyone were always trying, who's the new Frank Gore, except that he's productive. So the other takeaway that I had from this game is Jerry Jeudy. He's going to end up paying his bills, especially with Cortland Sutton out. 7 for 76 on 8 targets. I still like Jerry Jeudy, even though he's probably was overdrafted of where he was. He's still going to be a very nice wide receiver. Sometimes when you're picking in the middle of the first round of the real NFL draft, you're just like, you don't need to hit a home run. Getting a single or double is good enough. All right, moving on, Tennessee and the Chargers. This was an interesting game that the Chargers are now, I think fundamentally a different team now that they have all of their weapons back. And Justin Herbert looks like the player that, we originally thought he was. This Tua versus Herbert debate, it's on there. It's a little silly because it's clear when I watch it, that Herbert's the better football player, that he would be taken ahead by most NFL GMs. But for fantasy football here, Austin Eckler, who had 12 carries for 58 yards and a touchdown. Of course, he always adds in the passing game, but today not so much, only 2 catches for 12 yards. He's been the right answer, right? I mean, I saw him getting taken as high as pick 3, but we were fading him a little bit unless he fell to the back of the first round. He's been, quote, league winner. Josh Kelly, though, I think this is the big fantasy football takeaway, Nick Whalen, that he is what the Chargers wanted. Someone that can get double-digit carries, be used on the goal line, and he only had 24 yards, but he did get into the end zone here. What were the 2 big takeaways from this game on either side of the ball that you think are relevant for fantasy managers?
Yeah, I was going to mention Kelly as well. 25 snaps. He touched the ball in 11 of those 25. So when he was out there, they were using him. Ran a bunch of routes. Austin Eckler just continues to be Austin Eckler. I thought, in terms of how this game played out, I thought we were going to get double the points. I really thought Tennessee would be able to run the ball all over the Chargers. I thought we'd get long plays on the ground, and we got a few of those, but not really the case. And, the Chargers, Herbert did throw 2 picks. I wouldn't even say this was a great game for him by his standards. He was coming off of a fantastic game the previous week, but I thought both teams would be able to exploit the other, given their weaknesses on defense, and it just wasn't the case. I did not see this coming down to a field goal. We should mention for Tennessee, Ryan Tannehill was in and out of this game. We saw Malik Willis for a couple series. Tannehill was really favoring that ankle. I don't know that he's going to be 100% the rest of the way. That certainly impacts the Titans passing game. They were without a couple of their receivers in this game. I don't think we really need to talk Malik Willis unless you're talking dynasty. For now, that's just kind of a wait and see situation. I don't think we're going to need to address him as a potential starter in most redraft leagues next year. But like you said, for the Chargers, completely different team when both Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are out there. And we really have not seen that at all prior to these last 2 weeks. One or the other was always banged up. And I think you forget how good Keenan Allen is when he's healthy.
He's one of the best in the business, right? I mean, he's once again next year, he's going to be 30 plus, he'll be well into his 30-year-old and he'll be faded. But those NFFC, those high stakes drafters, man, they'll just smash him in the 3rd round and just get paid again. The other big takeaway is that Derrick Henry now is very much involved in the passing game. Caught 4 balls on 4 targets for basically almost 60 yards. Yep. That was one of the I would say the Achilles heels of his fantasy game, if at all. And you're going to hear a lot of fantasy advice next year. Fade Derrick Henry. It's better to get out a year too early than a year too late. Just draft Derrick Henry. He's built differently. If he falls to the end of the first round, and we've said a lot of guys are going to fall to the end of the first round, right? We can't draft everyone at the end of the first round. But if Derrick Henry, I don't care how old he is, I will die on that train, die on that hill. He's basically their whole identity, and he doesn't look any different to me. Just another huge day here. You're going to have a few ups, few downs, but his age will be a prohibitive factor for people trying to draft him next year. Yep. You agree? You'll take him in the first round? I mean,
I will, man. Hey, look, I got a stat for you. He's got more receiving yards than Saquon Barkley this season. And look, can we count on that necessarily? No, but I think it's a byproduct of Tennessee just having such a bad passing game, and it actually enhances Derrick Henry's value. It feels like every week now, Alan, he's ripping off like a 35-yard catch and run on a screen pass.
Yeah, and then Chig Okonkwo, the rookie 4th-round tight end, who's looked great every time the ball in his hand. He's definitely profited from Treylon Burks not being there. He'll be back, but they don't really have a lot of playmakers. So I think Chig is certainly inside the top 12 tight end cut line for the rest of the season, and he'll be a popular break. He's basically been what we thought Albert O was going to be, right? This athletic tight end who's been at least giving you some double-digit fantasy points, has some upside. So I think another big takeaway is that Chig is well inside the top 12 radar. Let's finish this out, Nick, with Cincinnati, Tampa Bay. Actually, and then we're going to hit the Giants real quick. Tom Brady, I know there's a lot of talk that, Tampa Bay blew a big lead here, right? I mean, they were up, and then Joe Burrow did what Tom Brady normally does, led them back. I guess really Are you seeing that Tom Brady doesn't look that different? Or are you falling on the side where, oh man, he should retire?
I still think he's well above average quarterback. I think there's maybe a lack of trust in the offensive line that started early in the year and has led to him, leading the league by a mile in terms of how quickly he gets the ball out. It's probably too quick at times. I think he's going way out of his way to avoid sacks. And look, if I was an NFL quarterback, especially one in my 40s with like no mobility, I'd be looking to avoid sacks too. But I think it's hurting their offense. And, yet again, Tampa Bay was unable to run the ball effectively, and that's been the case every single week. And we're starting to see defenses like they just don't even respect them against the run. And every week, Alan, I feel like we're watching like this like bizarre version of the air raid where the ball's just traveling 4 yards in the air every play. It's the Chris Godwin 2-yard slant raid and the Cade Otton 1-yard out raid. And all of a sudden it's 3rd and 8. And like the Buccaneers are just constantly in a series of 3rd and 8s that it feels like they very rarely pick up. Early in this game, they were moving the ball. They found some rhythm on offense. Like you said, they were up 17-0 in this game. Bengals had a pick on their first drive, went 3 and out on their next 3. They were able to tack on a field goal at the end of the first half. That actually felt like it built some momentum. That was the first real sustained drive that Cincinnati had all afternoon. And then in the second half, it's complete turnaround. I mean, the Bengals started to look like the Bengals, and the Bucs had back-to-back fumbles that absolutely killed them, and the offense just completely turtled up.
Yeah, I think the other takeaway is that Mixon and Pirine are more of a split than you originally thought.
Yeah.
There was some talk that Mixon was going to come back and just be the workhorse. Pirine showed enough in those games. And in the Super Bowl last year, where that's a 55-45 split the rest of the way. So obviously you're starting Mixon. You're not going to not start him, but just understand, Pirine's probably startable in a pinch too. I wouldn't, start him ahead of some of, the better options. Nobody's on bye anymore. It's hard to trust him in your fantasy semifinal and final. Jamar Chase, another 13 targets, locked in as a top 5 fantasy pick for next year. Other than that, Mike Evans, he had 10 targets, but only converts 5 for 83. There's been talk of him that he does not look the same Mike Evans. Do you think, let's just say they get like a decent quarterback in there. I thought Mike Evans still looks pretty good to me. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So you're observing the same thing that I'm seeing there as well. And I think that you covered all the other interesting thing, Russell Gage had 2 touchdowns. He had a pretty big day. 12 targets, 8 catches, 59 yards, 2 touchdowns. Where was this all year? Because I had a bet with our RotoWire's own Joe Bartle that Russell Gage was going to outpoint in fantasy points Alan Lazard. I think I got crushed. Now I have to pay his entry into the RotoWire Vegas League next year. But where was it? This is what I thought. I should redo the bet and say, hey, let's start in week 15, Joe. Right? And we'll have Lazard versus Russell Gage
Double
there.
Or nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't have too much else from this game. I will say that my team, where I ended up with a Brady, Godwin, Evans stack, is now officially eliminated. And this wasn't even that bad of a game by their standards, but it's been low upside all year, relatively high floor. It feels like you get 11 or 12 points from Evans or Godwin, but you're just hoping and praying that one of them finds their way into the end zone. Godwin did in this game. I'm with you on Evans though. I don't think he's really fallen off. I think he's had some uncharacteristic drops or kind of lack of concentration plays, but he stayed healthy all year, and really that's kind of been one of the main Achilles heels for him in the past. And the timing just looks off in Tampa Bay. Again, I think defenses know what's coming to a degree that we haven't really seen earlier in Brady's career. And if it's not Tom Brady for Tampa next year, does that make you feel any better? Obviously it depends who it is, but I don't feel like Mike Evans' value is necessarily tied to Tom Brady. I mean, he was putting up big numbers with Jameis. Yeah,
as long as they get someone that can put the ball downfield. There's going to be some interesting names too in free agency at the quarterback position. I mean, Jameis Winston will be, return to Tampa. Right. And Brady, I was taught, I mean, there's some talk that he could go back to New England. I don't think that that's probable, but it would be interesting to see him in San Francisco if Brock Purdy, loses the opening round playoff game. Because obviously if Purdy makes a deep run, that's going to be a situation to monitor as well. I put out a poll on Twitter and I said, who would you rather have? We're doing a dynasty startup superflex draft. So basically you have to draft every quarterback. Who do you think's a better dynasty asset right now, knowing only what you know right now, Nick? Brock Purdy or Zach Wilson? Which guy would you rather have on your fantasy team, knowing that you keep these guys for life?
Man, I feel bad for Jets fans that this is like a legitimate question that has to be asked. it has to be Purdy, right? I have no faith in Zach Wilson. It's like, yes, Zach Wilson, let's say he flames out and they stick with Mike White or they go with somebody else, in New York. Yeah, he could maybe have a Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold-like track where he's hopping around and, he'll get his opportunities. Like when you're a top 3 pick at the quarterback position, like you just have a long leash. Like there's always going to be a team or a GM or a scout out there who says, I love this guy coming out. We're going to be the team that can fix him. How often does that happen? Not very often.
Yeah. Well, I think that if it's a legitimate top 3 pick where it's a consensus, yes, that's the case. But Zach Wilson was considered a reach at number 2 by, I would say, the consent. There were people that thought, yes, he should be the number 2 quarterback. And, I remember Chris Sims was saying he was the number 1 quarterback that year. That to me blew my mind. But maybe it's just shock value. But I think there's more stickiness and more insulation in the 1-1 than there is in the 1-2 or 1-3. Yeah, those guys get traded, for the Sam Darnold types. Obviously, the Josh Rosen being the extreme after one bad year. See you later. But he was more of a top 10 pick. So right. I'm not so sure that maybe Zach Wilson at best, I think his upside at this point is like having a Ryan Fitzpatrick, Taylor Heineke style career where he's just like this interesting, fun backup for a team for a game or two. Other than that, I agree. That fun little exercise we did there with Brock Purdy. Let's finish out talking about the Commanders and Giants game. Big takeaway is that Saquon Barkley, he was the guy you drafted after a few down games. So obviously you didn't bench him, but at least you got some great fantasy production there. Giants might have a bottom 2, bottom 3 wide receiver room right now. They are going to have to, they traded Kadarius Toney away. Darius Slayton is obviously, he's been solid, but you want him more as your number 3 or your number 4. You don't want him to be your top receiver in targets. Hodgins has been a decent story. Richie James, kind of just a journeyman at this point. And they were using Saquon Barkley as the most targeted receiver. He had 8 targets, which led the team yesterday. So big takeaway here is that the Giants, they're in the playoff mix here. So they're not going to have a great draft pick. But they're an obvious flawed team. And next year, they're going to have to make a decision. Who they franchise, who do they extend with Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones? I'm curious, which one of those guys would you put the franchise tag on? And which one of them would you extend, or would you let one of them walk?
It's a really tough question because I think if you're the Giants, you've won just enough games. And at this point, you are likely to make the playoffs in the NFC, that I think turning around and saying, all right, see you, Daniel Jones. So we're done with that experiment. I think that's really tough to do. So I think they're kind of backed into a corner where, like, looking at it as I'm not somebody who roots for the Giants. I don't really care what they do. I don't know if I really see the upside with Daniel Jones. But, again, I think internally, everything we hear is positive in terms of the intangibles. Like, I think if you had to choose one or the other, historically speaking, teams will typically side with the quarterback. But obviously Saquon is in this really unique situation. He feels like the only above average playmaker on the roster. And I think there would be a minor riot among Giants fans if they let Saquon Barkley walk. So, I assume there's a way that they're going to try to figure out both of these guys, but ultimately then, you're kind of locked into what feels like a lower upside version of like the Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott contracts in Dallas, where at least those guys, when they're at their best, especially 2-3 years ago, you're talking Super Bowl caliber team. With the Giants, it needs to be a perfect environment around Daniel Jones to really have that kind of double-digit win upside.
Daniel Jones, what are the options if they don't extend him? Or I think franchise tag is the most likely if they can't get a team-friendly deal, because Daniel Jones is going to want elite quarterback money. They all rightfully all demand it. But if they can franchise tag him for the low 30s on 1 year, I think that's the move. And then Barkley, you make a decision. He's going to want Dalvin Cook type money, which is 10, 12 a year. If they can get it down to 5, 6 a year, which I don't think it will, it's going to be tough there. So I don't expect Saquon Barkley to, I'd say it's 50-50 right now if he's back with the Giants. Big takeaway from this game on the Washington Commanders side. Brian Robinson, man, 89 yards, 12 carries. He's basically been the workhorse running back for the last few weeks. Terry McLaurin does what he does, 6 for 70. Jahan Dotson, there hasn't been a bust rookie wide receiver this year in the first round, Nick. They're all good. We were trying to figure out who the bust was. Dotson, when he plays, man, 4 for 105 and a touchdown. That's been good. Curtis Samuel, who started the year hot, 3 for 44. What do you think the biggest fantasy football takeaway is from the Washington Commanders?
For me, it's that Brian Robinson is the real deal. It continues to get better and better as the season goes along. It feels like every week there's 2 or 3 plays that are clipped for Twitter of him just like carrying 7 guys for 4 more yards at the end of a play. I mean, he is really legit. And when he first came back from the gunshot wound injury, I was like, it doesn't quite look like the same guy, but it feels like every week he continues to pick up steam. So I'm very confident, starting Brian Robinson at this point. Tough night for Taylor Heineke. Basically lost Washington the game, 2 fumbles on 2 sacks, took hard hits. I'm not going to sit here and say, you know what, I would have hung onto the ball. Probably wouldn't have, but still, one of those returned for a touchdown. The other was just a crushing dagger late in this game. But you said it with Jahan Dotson. I mean, a couple really tough catches in this game, including his touchdown, 4 for 105. And the most impressive thing about these rookie first-round receivers is like none of them are even in good situations. Like they all have either terrible coaching or terrible quarterback play, in some cases both. And, guys like Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Jahan Dotson, even Treylon Burks started to come around. Like these guys were all placed in pretty rough situations, Chris Olave, and they all look great. So no, you're right. You're right to point that out. One more note on the Giants, by the way, talking about their playmakers. They have one receiver in the top 50 in terms of fantasy production, and it's Darius Slayton at number 50.
I like the top 50, and he's 50, right?
He's 50. I would love to say that they don't have anyone in the top 50, but that would not be factually accurate.
Nick, they don't have anyone in the top 49. I can assure you of that. Yeah. Now,
not cherry picking at all.
Well, Nick, as always, the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast is brought to you by our great sponsors, No House Advantage. Everyone go check out nohouseadvantage.com. Use promo code WIRE, and you'll get the deposit match. And then, of course, Monkey Knife Fight. Man, we thank them for their sponsorship all year long. The RotoWire Podcast will be back tomorrow, Tuesday, with the Waiver Wire edition with Joe and Jake. They do a great job of breaking down the waiver wire. And then everyone, remember, if you have SiriusXM in your car, Nick is on there Monday through Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern time, all of Monday, Thursday with Jeff Erickson. I think tonight you're going to be there with Joe Bartle, which is Monday night. Yeah. And I'll be joining you on the SiriusXM program next week. So if you enjoy hearing me and Nick mix it up, and also if you found value from this YouTube video, if you want to hit the like button, that helps us out. If not, we enjoyed that you were sitting here with us. And Nick will be back on, when's your next podcast? You do the Thursday podcast, right?
I do the Thursday RotoWire Sports Betting Pod with John McKechnie. Make sure you check that out. Love doing that with John. We continue to have a lot of fun with that each week. And then, of course, I'll be on the RotoWire NBA Pod as well. So you're probably locked in on fantasy football if you're listening to this. But if you're dipping your toes in basketball as well, make sure you give that a like.
And also subscribe to the YouTube channel. We put up new video content every day. Jim Coventry does a great job of putting out videos. Nick, Jeff, the whole crew. So we appreciate you. And thanks for joining us on the Monday edition of the podcast. Have a great rest of week and crush your fantasy semifinals if you made it. And if you didn't, stick with us because we enjoy your company all week and as we round out the fantasy football season.